Okay, right. Hello, everybody. So, all right, I'm not going to go into full presenter mode because it unnerves me not to see my next slide. I hope you'll all be all right with that. So hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. It really means a lot to us to have people that are interested in what we're doing and the work that we're doing. So my name is Chantal Spencer. I'm currently studying towards my Master's in Sustainable Design at the University of Brighton. I graduated from my BA in the summer of 2020, sorry, and that was in 3D design and craft. So I'm a maker as well as a designer. I'm also an avid disability rights activist, and that feeds into my design research work quite heavily. So all of my work over the last 5 years or more has been focused on understanding the nature of isolation. I've worked on projects where products that I've aimed to sort of demedicalize design for disability. This is one of the products I designed called Huggers. This is a sort of subversion of a weighted blanket so that it was pretty and nice thing to have around that you could wear out and about rather than having to manage your self-care only at home, which is generally what happens when you have a weighted blanket. It's a bit difficult to take one to the pub. I've worked on projects that have been around reframing damaging narratives of disabled people as incapable at best and parasitic at worst. This is my visibility arts organisation. I run it to support artists with disabilities. We've had a couple of shows, a couple of craft shows, and raised over £3,000 for my artists, and yeah, it's been amazing. And we were even on the telly. That's what's going on in that picture there. So very exciting. I've collaborated on big projects that celebrate disability. I was really lucky to be part of the team that ran Disability Pride Festival, which is a festival that was in Brighton, and it ran for about 3 years, all about disability. All the acts were disabled and everyone there was disabled, and the whole volunteer organisation, the volunteer group that was running it, which was us, we were all disabled too. And in the last festival we had, there was about 3,000 people that attended. Just really lovely event. Really proud to have been part of that. I was even the vice chair in the last year that it ran. I also write a blog, so an individual project, I suppose, where I use my own adventures as a way to encourage people like me outside into green spaces. And there's me, and there's my trusty steed, my mobility scooter, out in weird, wonderful places that you wouldn't normally expect them to be. So yeah, I've done a lot of stuff around the issue of isolation and disability. But what all of these projects have shown me is that we can only go so far when we put the labor of change on the shoulders of the oppressed. We do need to encourage disabled people to feel that they can come out and feel like they can take up a space in the world. But really, we also need to create sustainable outcomes, and we need to do that by enacting radical change that goes to the root of the issues that bound up in our culture, that has been designed around the dominant culture narratives. So this evening, I'm here to talk to you about my latest project, and it's called Cards Against Mobility. So this project's aim was to explore the complex relationship between intersectional communities and the manufacturing of isolation created by uneven freedoms of movement that exist, well, globally. Although these exist globally, my work itself focuses on the kind of micro perspectives of people's day-to-day lives. I argue that this is where my design research needs to be and needs to focus in order to dismantle the sort of dominant culture narratives that I spoke of earlier. To quote Mimi Scheller, professor of sociology and author of the book Mobility Justice, freedom of mobility may be considered a universal human right, yet in practice it exists in relation to class, race, sexuality, and ability. So that powerful sentence is, something that resonated with me really strongly. And I wondered how can design attend to that issue? How can my work manifest within this discourse? Scheller goes on to say that first, we need to reconnect the discussion of mobility justice to the corporeal struggles over gendered, sexual, disabling, and racialized mobility regimes. And that sentence in itself was really like my call to action. In addition to this, I'm also focusing on challenging our perception of traditional designing for disability, and how traditional designs for disability often fall short of creating well-designed solutions for the actual people using them over the people who are deciding to design them. In this slide, I'm going to play you a video of the disabled entrance to my local Sainsbury's supermarket, which I have to say has actually been closed for the last 4 months, so I can't even use it now. But anyway, I use this as an example of how traditional modes of design fall short in day-to-day life. This entrance on paper ticks all the boxes for step-free disabled access. There are no steps, there's just ramps and lift, and you get where you need to go. But in reality, it's dangerous, it's smelly, it leaves you feeling kind of less than human and really not up for going and buying a meal deal in Sainsbury's. Whilst I play this video, I'll be reading an excerpt from this project workbook and about the importance of autoethnography in my work and how it can bring a radicality to my design research. As I sit here and write these words, I've left my house barely a handful of times in the last 3 months. COVID-19 numbers raging at over 100,000 new cases per day, and my compromised immune system must be kept out of society, away from other humans. It is a high enough risk to have 2 teenage offspring attending places of education riddled with the deadly disease that could easily wipe me out for 6 months, if not kill me entirely. Although the current pandemic is responsible for a significant portion of my current exile from society, it is not the root of the issue. As a disabled woman who relies on a mobility scooter, I experience a plethora of barriers to my mobility, such as verbal abuse in the street, inaccessible buildings, pavements that are too dangerous for me to use, broken lifts, and many more. So who better to discuss and discover the complexity of isolation than someone like me? There's nothing more radical than existing within the wicked problem. I micro-gaze into my own experiences and interactions. I begin to ask questions and formulate hypotheses on how others, like me, may be struggling or perhaps thriving despite these barriers. I see autoethnography as my way of adding to this collective knowledge. Creating a space for that knowledge to reach others is also vital. So my blog writing process has become part of that experience. It adds a layer of productivity to failed missions, which helps cushion me from the crushing disappointment of having to experience a world so violently opposed to my existence. My radical design research position is based on dismantling barriers that create isolation for intersectional people. Interlacing myself within the foundations of this research process allows me to understand the minutiae of the barriers to mobility. It allows me to know, in a visceral way, what these barriers feel like and how they disperse like wildfire into a person's state of being. So, thanks. Yeah, this is a bit of a strange image to come straight up after that bit of text, but I promise it will make sense soon. So firstly, I would call the entrance at Sainsbury's an attempt at universal design, a type of design that has been revolutionary in many ways for disabled people. But I argue that that universal design needs to go further. For it to be truly universal, it must take into account the plurality of intersectionality. I have used this non-disability-based design issue as an example of what I mean by that. So the image on the right is what universal design tries to be, for example. Under the banner of inclusivity, it's actually othering many people. Those who do not identify as a male or female are met with this problematic symbol of a half man, half woman to represent them. Disabled people are now apparently a gender, and also it reinforces the idea that disabled people only exist in wheelchair user format. If you look over to the right, you can see that this designer has gone radical. They've removed all the problematic symbolism of the dominant culture narrative and simply signposted the toilet with a symbol of a toilet. So this for me is radical design and a great example of how to tackle these kind of issues. Although, of course, I recognise that sticky and unsolvable wicked problems that arise when designing for intersectionality are not all so easily solved. So for now, I'm invested in unpacking the complex nature of the problem with my research to understand what makes up our world and how we can use the things within it to build new systemic change that benefits the global majority rather than the dominant minority. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Ash. That's awesome. And definitely got a lot to come back to, I think, to pick up on from your presentation when we get to the Q&A. But for now, I'm just going to quickly stop the recording, introduce Gabe, and then